Well, 3 senators have introduced UBI in the form of $2,000 a month. You've got Massachusetts Senator Ed Markey, Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders, and California Senator Kamala Harris introduced a bill titled the Monthly Economic Crisis Support Act on Friday to provide monthly checks to most Americans. So the way this would work is you could potentially end up with $10,000 a month under this bill if you are a couple with 3 children. Says individuals with incomes up to $100,000 annually would receive a $2,000 a month check. Those who file as head of household are eligible up to $150,000 salary in order to qualify. Married couples who make up to $200,000 would receive a combined $4,000 a month. And for families with children, they would receive $2,000 per child up to 3 kids. And the bill would allow for payments throughout and 3 months after the pandemic ends. So payments would be retroactive to March. This is interesting. There's some questions that we should be asking about this, before we say, yay, okay, let's do it, UBI for everybody during the pandemic. There are definitely some questions. First, I want to show you the right-wing argument against this UBI. Here is Stuart Varney from Fox Business. This is what he has to say about it.
It's the worst of ideas at the worst of times. Free money for everyone. Can you believe it? Just as we're trying to get back to work, the left proposes $2,000 a month for every adult. You may have thought that this kind of universal income scheme bit the dust in the primaries, but no, it's back. Just one more way the socialists try to stick us with economic nonsense. 3 senators, Bernie Sanders, Kamala Harris, Ed Markey, they want to give $2,000 a month, no strings attached, to everyone 18 and older, quote, until the pandemic is over, whenever that might be. If that's not vote buying, I don't know what is. Vote for me and look what you will get. Look what I will give you. Point 1. How do you get people to work if they're making what? $50,000 a year each to stay home. The left doesn't want you to work for your money. They want you to be dependent on a government handout, which they control. Point number 2, who pays for it? The socialists pretend that the rich will pay, or we'll just print more money. This is economic fantasy land. Wealth confiscation trashes the Constitution. Money printing on a vast scale invites inflation. Socialism really is dangerous for your financial health. Somebody has to point out that America's world-beating economy was created by energetic people going to work, not handouts that encourage people to stay home and live off the government. In fact, there's a raft of big spending plans. Speaker Pelosi wants a new, big and bold, multi-trillion-dollar spending plan. AOC, well, unbelievably, she wants a general strike. Throw in this $2,000 a month vote-buying scheme, and you can see where the left is headed. Tax the rich, print money, make us all dependent on the government. They want to salvage political power from an economy wrecked by a government-ordered shutdown. This is not going to go away. It's only a matter of time before Joe Biden comes up with his own free money program. The left will try very hard not to let this crisis go to waste.
Okay, I have a hard time watching that. Listen, we are not in normal times. People cannot just pick themselves up by the bootstraps and go to work when the government has said you cannot work. That is not an option. So saying, oh, free money for everybody, free money. Well, whatever happened to working? Whatever happened to working? Yeah, whatever happened to working? People aren't able to work. So to make the argument of, oh, well, they just need to go to work is kind of impossible right now when the government says you're not allowed to. So if the government is going to rob you of your livelihood, the government needs to replace it. This is what we do for prisoners, for example. We don't incarcerate people and then say, hey, while you're here, pick yourself up by the bootstraps and make it on your own. No, we don't even ask prisoners, what kind of savings do you have? Because you're going to have to pay for this. Why didn't you save up for the rainy day that you might be imprisoned? We don't do that, not even for criminals, let alone for law-abiding Americans who are going about their lives, and suddenly the government told them, sorry, you cannot go to work anymore. Sorry, your bills are still going to continue. And I don't know how you're going to figure this out, but you're just going to have to. We don't even do that for prisoners. We don't do that to them. why are we now doing it to law-abiding Americans who unfortunately just happened across this government-enforced lockdown? To think that you're going to pick yourself by the bootstraps is insane to me. That obviously right now, the government needs to do something in order to help correct the economic crisis that this government-enforced shutdown has created. Obviously. The question is, what can the government do? Our current economic response, our country's economic response, has been unemployment benefits, which could be up to about $1,000 a week. So you're getting $600 from the federal government. Depending on your state, some states give as little as $150 a week. Some give up to $400 or $500 a week. So you could be looking at anywhere from $700, $800 a week to $1,000 a week on unemployment benefits. That is roughly replacing about a $33,000 to $50,000 a year income. So for people in that income bracket, our current economic response isn't too bad, actually. So if you are in that window of income, then you're doing okay. Even if you're a little under than that, if the government is going to give you at least $600 a week, you're probably faring well. There are some people who are actually making a little bit more right now from the unemployment benefits than they were working their jobs. And that has been a little bit of a problem. There have been some reports of people saying, their workers don't want to come back to work, or they don't want the Paycheck Protection Program. Small businesses are able to take out loans in order to pay their bills. The portion that they use to pay for salaries is forgivable by the federal government. Some small business owners have reported doing this, and then their workers get mad, and their workers say, no, I want to file for unemployment because I'm going to get $1,000 a week off of unemployment, whereas you're only going to give me, $3,000 for the month. I'm going to get $4,000 if I file for unemployment. That there are some reports of that. That is something that we have to take into consideration for sure. But quite a few Americans are stressing out, especially if they live in larger cities like New York, Los Angeles, San Francisco, where $30,000 to $50,000 a year is not enough to live in those cities. So the people that are making $75,000, $80,000, $100,000, $150,000, I know that sounds like a lot, but in a place like Los Angeles or New York, $150,000 is not. Those people are very stressed out right now. They are freaking out. Their rents are piling up. Their mortgages are piling up. Their bills are piling up. They're going into massive debt suddenly off of a government-enforced shutdown. So, and banks are still operating. Everybody still has their rent due. Everybody's mortgages are still due. Student loans are pretty much all still due. I think there's some that might be giving some deferments. But for the most part, banks are still operating. Banks are still collecting all of their money. This has been an absolute disaster. Clearly, more needs to be done. More needs to be done to help the many millions of Americans who are absolutely suffering and suddenly riddled in massive debt. Let's look at what some other countries have done before we can kind of look at the UBI and how this would work. When you look at the UK, so the UK, what they're doing is 80% of salaries up to what would be equivalent to about $2,900 a month is what they're doing. When you look at that, it's not as good as what the US is doing, actually. Surprisingly, I was a little surprised by that when I was looking around at what other countries were doing. I thought the US was going to be the worst of all of the countries, but $2,900 is certainly less than $4,000. So if you're on unemployment right now and you're making $4,000 a month off unemployment, then you're in a much better position than somebody in the UK making $2,900. Denmark, what they're doing is 90% of hourly wages will be paid, and 75% of salaries will be paid. And I don't believe they have a cap on that. So if you are a salaried employee, you get up to 75% of your income. And if you're a hourly employee, you get 90% of your income, because typically people who are hourly make less. Their paychecks don't go as far. They're living more paycheck to paycheck. They're really needing more of their money. Now, looking at a UBI plan. So a UBI plan, some of the questions that people have, or that we should be asking when we're looking at this, is Is this a replacement for the unemployment that's currently there, or is this in addition to the unemployment that's already there? If it's a replacement, let's kind of do the math here. So if you're a single person making up to $100,000, you would get $2,000 a month. However, right now, if you're on unemployment, you're potentially getting $4,000 a month because you're getting maybe $1,000 a week on unemployment. So, because if you're making $100,000 a year, you're maxing out your state's unemployment. So here in the state of California, for example, it would be maybe $400 a week. Plus, I would get the federal government $600 a week. So I'm looking at $1,000 a week. $4,000 a month is better than $2,000 a month, right? If you're a couple and there's two of you, $8,000 a month is better than $4,000 a month. So if you're each getting $2,000, and but you're also getting the $4,000, or you're getting the $4,000, obviously $8,000 is better. If it's in addition to, that would be interesting. If it's in addition, then I don't know. I don't think it has a chance to pass if it's in addition, because I think there's going to be too many people saying, wait a minute. So you're going to give a couple $8,000 a month from their unemployment, plus they're going to get another $4,000 a month in UBI. And if they have children, it's going to be even more. So if they have kids, they're saying that they're going to give $2,000 per child up to 3 kids. So if you're a family of 5 and you're both working, you're both bringing in potentially $8,000 a month in unemployment, plus you'd potentially be bringing in another $10,000 a month in UBI, $18,000 a month suddenly. I mean, now you're making, what is that, like $200,000 a year? And maybe you were a family that was making $75,000 or $100,000. That's going to be a problem trying to pass this bill when we're looking at what kind of chances this has. I would guess that it's more of a replacement. If it's a replacement, it's not a good replacement. It's not a good swap. It is, I believe, better if you do have children. So if you are on unemployment right now and you're a couple with 3 kids and you're only getting $8,000 a month, that is lower than $10,000 a month you could get with the UBI. So it's better for families with, it's the same if you're a family, if you're a couple with 2 kids, it would be a wash potentially, depending on if you qualified for that actual $1,000 a week. So if you're only qualifying for $700 a week, then obviously the UBI would be better. But it is definitely better if you have 3 kids. So I don't know if this is going to pass. I don't know what the chances are. And I think there's going to be too much pushback. I think you're going to have too many Republicans that say, for one, if this is in addition, that's crazy. It's too much money. And 2, if it's not an addition, it's a replacement. I think you're going to get pushback from even people from the left. They're going to say, no, they don't want this. They don't want a smaller amount. They want the same amount. What would be a better solution? Look, I'm not necessarily against a UBI. I do think that there's some legitimate criticisms of UBI that have to be addressed and discussed and thought about. One of my big criticisms, look, in a situation like this where it's just a UBI during the crisis, in order to get people through and get them by and pay their bills, obviously we have to do something. But the actual discussion of UBI, which is what a lot of people are going to want to turn this into, is an overall discussion of UBI. They shouldn't even be having that discussion because that's not what this is. This is a relief package specifically for the pandemic. But the criticisms that people have about UBI is that it would cause inflation. During a pandemic, it's not going to cause inflation. During a pandemic, it's just going to pay bills. People are struggling. They can't pay bills. They can't pay their rents, their mortgages, their car loans, their student loans, food. They're not able to do these things. They need to be able to do those things. So a UBI is not going to cause inflation. It's just going to keep people afloat. It's just going to keep the economy going at this point. Will it cause people to not want to go back to work? Maybe, depending. That's definitely a legitimate thing to look at. But if this is also, once again, temporary until the government decides to lift the lockdown on people, that this is a stimulus package during the pandemic and 3 months later to get you back on your feet, that's not going to be a problem. People are going to eventually have to go back to work when the government decides pandemic's over. But as long as the government has decided we're in a pandemic, then yes, of course, the government has to provide for the prisoners that the government has created out of all of us. What could be possibly a better solution than this? If we're going to come up with another plan, we're clearly in we've got a serious situation here. One of my thoughts that I've always thought should happen is a complete moratorium on all loan payments and rents, right? Just freeze time. Just say, okay, nobody owes on their mortgage, nobody owes on their rent, nobody owes on their car payments, their student loans, everything just stops. Just stop time, and then we'll pick back up when the pandemic's over, when we lift and say, okay, you can go back to work. The only problem with that is in more thought. Like if you live in an apartment complex, for instance, your rent goes for the maintenance of the buildings. There's workers that are still here. Things still have to function. If you're a landlord, it's the same sort of thing. Banks, they still do have to have people servicing those loans and employees. And so you can't really fully do a moratorium or a freeze. You could potentially, you could, and then the guy at the end, everybody files to the government and says, okay, if I'm a landlord or if I'm a renter, I don't pay my rent. My landlord then obviously has a problem. My landlord then files with the government, and then the government tells the banks to give that landlord money in order to survive, and then the banks get bailed out in the end. The banks are going to get bailed out in the end anyway, so they probably could do that. That's probably something they absolutely could do. So we could maybe do a freeze. Yeah, we could maybe do a freeze on all payments and on all loans and all rents. What we could also do is a reduced payment on all loans and rents. That should be what's happening. Some countries are doing freezes on mortgages. They didn't freeze rents. Italy froze mortgages. The problem with that was then you had a lot of renters who were still being forced to pay rent. Their landlords were still collecting mortgages, almost taking advantage of the situation. You've got to be able to prevent that from happening. So you'd have to freeze everybody and then say this will trickle all the way up to the top, and whoever's holding the bag, the government bails out. You could do reduced payments. So if you're going to do like what the UK does, or Denmark is a better example, if you're going to say, okay, we're going to pay 75% of salaried employees' wages, and we're going to pay 90% of hourly employees' wages, then the remainder that you're left with that 25% or 10%, what we're going to do is issue a reduction in all mortgages, rents, loans. Everybody's reduced. All loans are down 50%. So everybody just pays 50% during the pandemic, or that 25% reduction or 10% reduction, whatever they choose to do, plus food stamps. Why aren't we giving everybody food stamps? Why are we forcing people to rely on food banks that are running out of food? Why aren't we just giving out food stamps during the pandemic? Say, okay, look, every American must eat. Everybody must eat. So what we're going to do is issue everybody food stamps and leave the food banks for those who are undocumented or need more than what the food stamps are providing. Why are we not giving every American food stamps? This is what I'm not understanding. In China, they have a breadbasket program where what they set up back in the early 2000s was that every municipality would have to grow enough rice and vegetables to feed their population in the event of a crisis. So when this crisis happened, nobody in China had to worry about starvation. They all knew that they could tap into the breadbasket program. Why are we not doing something very similar? Everybody gets a certain amount of food stamps for their basic needs, basic rations, rationing. Are we not in a battle with a virus? Is this not a form of war? Why are we not giving people food stamps? You can then, of course, go to the store and buy more if you have money. But certain items and goods should be food stamp paid for with food stamps. And people should be able to eat. Everybody should be able to qualify for food stamps. I don't understand why that's not happening right now. But that is the latest with what is going on with this $2,000 a month proposal. There are still some questions. I don't think it's perfect. We would need some answers. Is this a replacement? Is this addition? The likelihood of this going through, I'm not sure. It's at least a good starting point. Potentially what this would do is get Republicans to the table to start talking. One of the things that's been absolutely aggravating is like this Stuart Varney attitude of, pick yourself up by the bootstraps. Even though we've completely shut you down, even though we've imprisoned you, pick yourself up by the bootstraps. It's absolute bullshit. So thank you guys so much for watching. Please subscribe and hit the bell. Thank you for sticking with me. I know I was MIA for a week. I was under the weather, unfortunately, and heavily medicated. And so I wasn't making any sense whatsoever. But I am here now, and I appreciate you sticking with me. Thank you so much for watching.